Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. I'm Mark Stein, Thrive founder and your podcast host. We're creating sustainable, inclusive, and multi-generational residential communities. Our mission is to combat the epidemic of isolation, revitalize communities, and help others discover the many benefits of engaged community living by offering unique and ecologically sustainable co-living options. In this podcast series, join us as we discuss co-living, in addition to bringing you interesting people from around the world who are doing cool things to expand your knowledge and satisfy your curiosity. Through this podcast, learn more about our concept and see how Thrive co-living communities will bring together people from all walks of life who want to enjoy the best of independent and group living. To find out more about us, please visit our website at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. Thanks for watching and enjoy the podcast. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Thrive Co-Living Communities podcast. Glad to have you back and glad to have Jeffrey Clarke back from Clarke Realty down in Tampa Bay. We talked about 6 months ago about the state of the market, both nationally as well as locally. And we were in a really odd place coming out of high interest rates just starting to spike. So it was a real odd market. And according to our brief chat before the episode, things are still kind of strange. So glad to have Jeffrey back and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be back. This was fun the first time, so I'm expecting to be twice as fun this time.
Good. You're putting the pressure on me.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about where we were, where the market was 6 months ago, how you see it looking back on it, and where we are now. I still think we have some of the same conditions going on. What's happening?
For sure. So, well, I'd say the biggest differetiator between then and now is we've received a little bit more clarity on where things might end up. At least the parameters have been more narrowly defined. Back in December, I think, was when we had our first conversation. And I mean, we still don't know today what the Fed's going to do on interest rates, but at least we have more insight. Back in December, are they going to do, 5 more hikes, 6 more hikes? Is it going to go up a quarter, 25 basis points a time? Are they going to go back to 75 basis points? We had no idea. We hadn't seen a lot of very, how would you say it, positive news regarding inflation. Everything kind of remained to be seen. And we were entering into a market, as you and hopefully your listeners know, real estate, tracking the real estate market, you're always playing catch up. It takes, 30 to 60 days to close on a transaction for you to see what that home actually sold for. And so constantly you're playing catch up with the data. So going through December, going into 2023, a lot of the questions hovering were, okay, is inflation going to cool off? What is Jerome Powell and the remainder of the Fed going to do in regards to interest rates? How will that affect mortgage interest rates? Because they're not one-to-one. They're heavily correlated, but they're not one-to-one. And what's going to happen with prices? That's what all this stuff really boils down to, is people just want to know what's going to go on with their home's value. Is the market going to crash? Is the market going to boom? Is it going to be flat? And while we still have a lot of uncertainty today, a lot of those things have been given very useful context and information. I feel like we have a better grasp on it now than we did then. But yeah, definitely still in kind of a different market, different than what we've seen for the past few years anyways.
Mm-hmm. I thought, and full disclosure, I bought a property and Jeffrey was my agent back in, that was February, March that we did the purchase. Mm-hmm. And I was really expecting prices to fall, mm-hmm. that with the rising interest rates, and we bought at the peak. It did come down a little bit from the time that we bought in February, March. interest rates had gone up. The inventory was still constrained as it is now, but I really thought prices were going to come down. And I don't think, have they come down any or just a little bit?
Well, so day to day, you can find like micro data that you might see like what would you call it? Like it's almost like a lens flare, but for data. So like you might find hot spots on certain days where someone's manipulated the numbers. But if you look at a month to month or year over year basis, we have not seen a decline yet in our county. Now that's going to vary. This is all based off of either average or median. I have access to both of those numbers, so I'll give you whichever you feel more comfortable with. So take that with a grain of salt. This is for Pinellas County, average or median sales prices. There's obviously going to be some neighborhoods or price points or style of homes that are going to get hit worse than others. But yeah, overall, in Pinellas County, we have yet to see a decline. Year to date, right now, the most updated data we have is May. June's data should come out in a little under a week. So we're working with up to May's accuracy of data. And as of May, the year-to-date appreciation for Pinellas County was 2.2% from January to May. May 2022 to May 2023, saw a 0.0% appreciation year over year, meaning we didn't gain anything, we didn't lose anything in May. And then April, March, February all saw positive appreciation year over year in the order of magnitude of 2 to 4%. February was a little over 4%. March and April were a little over 2%, and then January was 0.0. So
what about nationally? Because our market in Florida is relatively hot compared to the rest of the nation anyway.
Right.
What about nationally? Are we seeing any increases or decreases in prices in general?
It's so market specific. I push back a little bit. It's a good question to ask, and everyone asks the question, but I always push back on this question a bit because it's hard to say. It's kind of like asking, how big is a fish? It's like, in all of the ocean, how big is a fish? It's like, well, a whale shark is a fish.
Some are big, some are small.
Right. And so is a pinfish. And so, markets like Austin's a great example. Austin has seen a decline in the median sales price. But Austin, and it's usually the markets that had the biggest booms during the free money, no inventory disease period that are seeing a little bit of pullback because they did get a little bubbly. Like, and Austin was a good example because a lot of people were going there. Their prices, like, I mean, take this with a grain of salt. I don't know their market stats as well as mine, but I'm pretty sure their prices like tripled in like the ballpark of like a year and a half. And so they've seen a little bit of a decline in the average. Same thing with some of the higher price point areas of California. They're seeing a lot of people kind of pulling out and going elsewhere. So there's little markets that are seeing declines in the average sales price, but as a whole, nationally, we're seeing, pretty comparable. Florida as a state and Pinellas County tracks pretty well to Florida as a state, maybe even slightly more insulated because we have such high demand. But Florida as a tighter market is pretty consistent with this.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that Pinellas County, which is St. Petersburg, Clearwater, up that way, that it's the most densely populated county in all of Florida.
Is it? That's a fun stat.
Yeah, that's odd to me, but
really?
I've heard it several places.
I'll look into that. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. It's, people really want to be here. It's remarkable to me. Regularly in our business, we're seeing people coming from out of state or even other areas of the state to come here because we have sunshine, good times, you're close to the beach, especially if you think of like our offices in downtown St. Petersburg. And imagine being in St. Petersburg and what you have accessible to you within a 30-mile radius. You've got 5 of the nation's best beaches within driving distance.
Sarasota.
Yeah. And you can go straight to Tampa. Like you can go over the bridge to Tampa. You can go over the bridge to Sarasota. You can go straight across to Clearwater. Within 30 minutes of you, you've got 3 huge draws, and you live smack dab in the center of it in an up and coming bustling city. And that's not just the case for St. Petersburg. You could argue that for Pinellas Park. You could argue that for Clearwater itself, or Tampa, or Sarasota. This area just seems to be bringing in a lot of people, which is good because, well, good or bad depending on who you ask, but it adds demand, right? So that helps keep prices up.
So let's talk about inventory a little bit.
Yes.
What's happening with inventory?
in Pinellas County?
Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah,
And if you can speak to it more broadly.
for sure. So pending inventory year over year, as in May in Pinellas County, was down 13%, 12.9 or something like that. So we lost inventory, right? And so as everybody knows, price is just a function of supply and demand. If you're losing supply, then equivalent demand will cause an increase in price. If you lose supply, but you also lose demand, as long as the loss of supply outpaces the loss of demand, you'll still see an increase in pricing, right? So we lost 13% of inventory compared to how many houses we had for sale last year at this time. And I think a lot of that is, I heard a phrase recently called, how did he phrase it? He said it's like locked in syndrome. And I think a lot of it is just a lot of people bought or refinanced properties at a 3.5% rate. And they're just like, why would I sell it? Why would I sell? Even if I want to buy a new house, which we're seeing a lot of, the payments are so low on the other ones. You just need to put a long-term renter in there and it cancels out on your next mortgage application. Rents are at relatively all-time highs. So yeah, very low on inventory. And that's, again, pretty consistent throughout the state and pretty consistent throughout the country, with obviously, you're never going to have homogenous data across a 300 million population country. But generally speaking, that's the trend that's being followed in most markets.
Pardon, I keep playing with my lighting. I look really green.
You look great on my screen. Handsome as ever.
Okay, thank you.
I'll forgive you on that if you forgive me if I take a sip of my smoothie
No,
while you're
go
talking.
No, go ahead. You see me drinking water. We keep this informal here.
Yeah.
So in order to resolve this inventory issue, I guess rates are going to have to drop back down, at least getting into the vicinity of the 4.5.
I'd be
urge people to move.
Yeah. I don't know. I think yes, that would help for sure. I think if rates get down to with a 4 on the front end, we get a bunch more inventory, but I mean, demand is just gonna rip and roar if that happens too, So it's kind of, I really don't see a situation where we get a huge flood in inventory. It's hard. It's just a different market. And I know everyone's kind of looking for that because it's very easy to like clickbait on that title. Like, if inventory tripled, prices are going to go down. But the reality situation is, yeah, people would start listing some properties maybe if rates dropped and if they were confident they could buy another property with a similar rate. But at the same time, that's just going to get eaten up by new buyer demand. So I think we're kind of in this transition point where, or maybe a new normal, especially in our market where there's not a lot of space for new construction. There's not a lot of opportunities for us to get a ton of inventory back. I do have one, the most compelling argument I've heard recently for how we might get a huge influx in listings such that the pending inventory is not decreasing would be, you've heard about this Airbnb collapse that people are talking about?
Airbnb what?
Collapse.
No.
Okay, so there's been a lot of headlines lately. And this happens, it seems to be every 3-4 months. Some headline comes out about how Airbnb is ending the world and is all going to burn to the ground. But in a lot of these big metropolitan markets, Airbnb revenues are down compared to where they were last year. I think just a result of, money supply being lower, people's expenses being higher, doing exactly what the Fed wants, is stopping discretionary spending. A lot of Airbnb stays could be classified as discretionary spending. So the most compelling argument I've heard recently for how are we going to get a ton more inventory into the market is people thinking that people who have Airbnbs who are now seeing decreases in their income aren't going to be able to float their properties and therefore might flood the market. And I ran some numbers on this, and please forgive me because I won't have the exact numbers, but I will have the relatively correct ratio. And I ran numbers for 2 markets in driving distance us that allow for short-term rentals, because St. Pete proper does not allow for short-term rentals, but Largo does and Tampa does. And so in Largo, when I checked, there was some like 850 short-term rentals. And there were, I want to say there was like 400 properties for sale when I checked it at that time. kind of like a 2-to-1 ratio. In Tampa, I think it was like 3-to-1. And so you can imagine a situation where, let's say, like COVID happened. When COVID happened for like 2 months or 3 months, Airbnb shut down. They weren't allowing anybody. And a lot of people only have their property in Airbnb. And there's reasons that's not a good idea. If you have a short-term rental, you should be on multiple platforms. But let's say you were, and let's say Airbnb disappears. You can imagine if all of that inventory flooded the market, what that would do for pricing. The problem with that argument, again, this was the best argument I've heard recently, was the more you look into it, the more cracks start to show. And versus even with decreased revenues, Airbnbs are doing just fine, way better than long-term rentals. I'll tell you anecdotally from, I have 2 short-term rentals that I manage a bunch of short-term rentals for a bunch of people, but I have 2 that are mine that I'm comfortable sharing numbers on. And my revenues are down from last year to this year a little bit, maybe 25%, which is, I guess that's not insignificant if you look at it off the top. But for comparison, I'm still netting twice as much, maybe 3 times as much, somewhere between those two, as I would if I had it as a long-term rental. So yeah, my revenues are down, but my mortgage is still being paid, and I'm still cash flowing 2 to 3 times as much as I would if I'm a long-term rental. So is that house going on the market? Certainly not. And let's carry this exercise forward. Even if, let's say that the Airbnb does completely collapse and revenues don't just drop 25%, they drop 75%. Well, do I sell the property then? No, I've got a 3% rate on both of my Airbnb properties. Those become long-term rentals, and now they're still cash flowing. So I think a big chunk of those Airbnb properties don't hit the market, even if Airbnb's revenues do continue to decline. I think a lot of them, first off, I think a lot of them become rentals. Second off, all this doesn't happen at the same time. So the odds of you getting 3 times the inventory flooding the market in the same month is nonsense. Different people run out of money at different rates. And then the other thing that people don't take into account is if half of the Airbnb inventory falls away, what happens to Airbnb revenues? They shoot up. Because just like with everything else, it's supply and demand. So if a quarter of the Airbnb properties get listed, everybody else who stayed is now capturing their demand and is able to raise prices. And so it's kind of a self-equalizing thing. I do think some of those Airbnb properties, especially with self-management, like people who aren't professionally managing or aren't really involved with it, I think some of those people will end up long-term renting it. Some of those people will end up selling it. But the more you look at it, the less convinced I am that that's going to be what causes a huge increase in inventory. But we'll see. Again, no crystal ball. Big asterisk. I should have said this at the beginning, Mark. I do not have a crystal ball. I'm human. I am fallible. It's possible. You should always make decisions based off of your own research. This is what I'm seeing, though.
And I don't know that, there are some areas where people are cutting back. I think that new car purchases and used car purchases are declining, and those prices are going down. But I did hear in a podcast that international travel is still up. I recently traveled on Allegiant, which goes to these types of destinations from upper Midwest and Northeast. And the flight attendant said that every flight was booked solid.
Yeah.
So, and the theory I'm hearing is that people are still feeling the remnants of being pent up during COVID.
Yeah.
And I think some spending is going down, but not everything. And travel is not. So that would not point to an Airbnb problem.
Sure. Right. So. And I should say too, like, anytime I talk about market data or whatever, I'm always looking at it. I'm always looking at the numbers in terms of like their ratio. So we don't really need demand for Airbnbs to drop to have a decrease in revenue. Like I think actually by Airbnb's numbers, because the stock's public now, which is great. So you can get an insight into like their revenues. I'm pretty sure their revenues actually increased. So demand for Airbnb's proper might have gone up. I don't know enough to say, but I do know for sure that supply of Airbnbs have gone up. And I think that's one of the major contributors to the decrease in revenue in some of these markets. But that was going to happen. I've said this. I think I've said this to you. I've said this for the last 3 years that it is ridiculous that I'll use my properties as an example again, that I could cash flow $500 as a long-term rental, or I could cash flow $2,500 as a short-term rental. In that world, why would you ever do a long-term rental? So you would expect that the market is going to catch up at some point. You'd expect that spread is too large. That spread is more than the additional effort and cost it takes to start an Airbnb. So people, of course, are going to flood in. Prices need to stabilize. We're figuring it all out together as a market right now. It's fun to watch, though. it's interesting.
Let's move to the micro for a minute and talk about something that I'm sure we didn't talk about before. So let's say you've got a family, and let's just try to do a prototypical straight family. No, let's not. Just two kids. Two kids.
Got it.
All right. And we're ready for our first purchase. Walk us through what we should be looking for. And I know it's going to vary by family, but what are some of the things that, as a new family, first-time homeowners, that we want to be sure we catch and don't miss? And there's probably, I'm guessing there are more things that can bite you that you miss than finding things that attract you. Yeah. So what are some of the do's and don'ts as you're looking for what it is that you want and need?
Mm-hmm. I could give a 4-hour TED talk on this topic. Okay.
What?
Well, let me repeat your question back to you to make sure I'm answering what you actually want me to answer. So you're asking, what are risks that new homeowners should seek to avoid that may not be immediately obvious?
And what to look for to meet your needs.
Got it. Okay. Well, let's see. I'm trying to organize in my head what order I want to approach this. I would say the first thing to look at, the biggest risk, is not actually thinking through that this is what you really want to do. I see that happen from time to time, and that's the biggest. You want buying a house to be a positive experience. You want it to build wealth for your family long term. You want it to be happy and joyous. You don't want to be stressed, have it cause pain on your family. You don't want to have to sell a year after you buy and take a loss. It's very hard, even in a market that's appreciating, to sell a home after a year of owning it and not take a loss, just with all the fees. So the first step is identify the you risk, meaning, am I comfortable staying here for the next 3 to 5 years? That's generally the advised minimum that you should stay a place to make a little money and not, or at least break even, be low risk for losing money. That's the first question. Second question is, and built into that actually, so 1B is, are my motivations appropriate and am I actually getting what I need? Sometimes, so we do our best to advise people with what we can see, but at the end of the day, it's their decision. And one of our core values is operate with integrity. So we find ourselves often asking people to double check themselves on things. In your example, if you have 2 kids and you're looking in this market and you're tight on funds, and so maybe you're only looking at 2 ones and your kids are 3 and 5 right now, and it's a boy and a girl, like really think about that. Are you comfortable if in 5 years from now, you're still in this home, that your then 12-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter are still sharing a bedroom? Or is this going to be a problem long term? People tend to want to get into the house because that's what they feel like they need to do. And it's sometimes better to wait a year, get your ducks in a row, and make sure you're making the right decision. This is a 10-year play, not a 10-month play. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I kind of already touched on, but make sure it actually works for your family. If you've got a 100-pound dog, maybe don't look at houses that have a 0.1 acre lot size where there's no yard out back. If you have 2 kids and they're of different genders and you don't want them to share a room moving forward, you might want to take that into consideration. Just being very realistic about the long-term plans of your house. The average person lives in their house 7 to 9 years. So planning ahead for that. You want to make sure that the age of all the major systems is to your liking. Now, thankfully, your financing and your insurance are going to be very buyer protective of you. Like unless you're paying cash, your lender's going to need to make sure that your home meets basic condition requirements. And those basic condition requirements are the big ticket safety items. So you're kind of protected from that, but just because it's something's not an issue today where you can get a loan doesn't mean that it's not likely that it'll be an issue a year from now. And I see all the time, you get an inspection, you get back, it says, hey, the roof's got, 6 years of life left, which is insurable. I think insurance agents want to see 3 years, maybe something like that, 3 to 5. But hey, if you're buying a house that has 6 years of roof left, you're gonna have to put on a $10,000 roof in 5 years. So you got to plan for that. These are all like,
speaking of big ticket items.
Yeah.
What about home warranties?
Yeah. Home warranties are a great tool. Home warranties they're a great tool, but they're not the save-all. Like I really like home warranties, especially as a negotiation tool in inspection periods. Oftentimes, you can turn a small issue that the seller may not be willing to fix into a home warranty plan that protects and solves not only the issue you're looking at, for instance, a faulty HVAC or something, or like an older HVAC that may be working but on its last leg. You can get that home warranty paid by the seller so that they don't have to fix it before closing, but now you're protected for the next year at a cost that's relatively reasonable to the seller, so they're likely to accept. Where you have to be careful with home warranties is, as with anything else, there's tiered systems, and different home warranty programs have different copays. Different home warranty programs have different timetables. Different home warranty programs have different appliances they actually cover or don't cover. So my advice on that is do your due diligence. If this is going to be your protection, if this is designed to protect you from having a big out-of-pocket expense in that first year, which is so critical because there's always a bunch of expenses in the first year. It's just how it goes. Do your due diligence on your home warranty, and the agent that you're working with, as long as they're a good one, will help you with that. But yeah, I love them. If you can get the seller to agree to one, then they're great. I'd rather have a brand new HVAC, but if I can't get that, I'll take a home warranty.
Mm-hmm. And do you have certain ones that you will steer a seller? Let's say you're the buyer's agent, certain types and tiers that you'll recommend to the seller's agent. Hey, we want one with no less than $500 deductible, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the way that we end up presenting this is it's almost always in an inspection period. Sometimes this gets negotiated in the initial offer, but very rarely. Like I said, usually we use it to solve problems that may arise in an inspection period. And we'll write up on an addendum what we're requesting, and then we will ship it over to the seller. So ideally, as a buyer's representative in that situation, you want to take away the option of choice from the seller. You want to come to them with the name of the company, the tier of the plan, and the deadline. So ideally, we take that out of their control at all. And the interesting thing is, this is why it's so silly, and it's so important to just check these tiers. The difference between the lowest and the highest tier is a few $100. It's like $400 or $650. So it's not a hill the seller's going to die on. They're not going to die on $250 difference to sell a $400,000 house. If they do, then they're just being silly. But, they're not going to die on that difference. So I'm always of the opinion on the buyer side, we should ask for as much as we possibly can to get those things. And we clearly define what we want.
Any other pitfalls or promises to look for when you're buying a new house with this fictitious couple that we talked about?
Yeah, I think look at the age of the major systems, make sure it works with your budget, that you'll either be able to replace it or that you have a long enough timetable. Look at school zones. I know these people already have 2 kids, but a lot of young like I've sold a couple houses where people bought these houses like 2-3 years ago. Freshly married, newlyweds, parents helped them with down payment, got a house. And then 3 years in, they want to try for a baby, but they hate the school zone. So they sell. And like I said, you really don't want to sell a house in the first few years. There hasn't been enough time. So school zones, look into school zones. That couple that you used as an example already has kids, so they should be already thinking about it. If they're not, they should be. It's always good to be in relatively established neighborhoods because they have a better track record. This doesn't mean avoid new construction, but it just means, if you have a neighborhood that's been around for 20 years, it's more established. This is similar advice to what Dave Ramsey gives too. You don't want to be the biggest house in the neighborhood. It's better to be the small fish than it is to be king of the hill when it comes to real estate. A couple of pretty comprehensive studies have proved that. if you're the biggest house in the neighborhood, you're going to get a lower dollar per square foot than you would if you were the smallest house. Also, if you think about the demand dynamics in that situation, how many people would rather be the pretty nice 3-2 in the neighborhood full of 5-4 mansions versus being the guy who's going to buy the 5-4 mansion in a neighborhood full of 3-2s. So that's a thing. You want to be conforming to your neighborhood or maybe just under. That's a better spot to be. What else is important? Proximity to all the normal stuff. You want to be close to a grocery store. You want to be close to a Starbucks if you can, or a gas station. If you have to drive 20 minutes to get to your nearest grocery store, your resale is not going to be as well as it could have been. Now, thankfully, a lot of those factors come in when you purchase it. So you'll be paying less than you would have if it were close to a grocery store. But these are just things to factor. It's such a cliche, but location, location, location. It matters.
Cool. Okay, let's switch gears.
Let's do it.
So I haven't been in this position, but I've heard of people that are, where they're ready to sell their house and there are major renovations that need to be made.
Yeah.
And to me, there would be nothing more heartbreaking than redoing a kitchen on your way out of a house.
Yeah.
So, and I think bathrooms, kitchens, there are probably other areas, but talk to me. Let's say somebody's just moved into the house. They've got an older kitchen. They've got older bathrooms that haven't been renovated in a while. The price was okay. What they paid for it was okay. So they didn't pay a price that warranted a new kitchen. So it was priced in. What should a new owner's priority be in updating kitchens, bathrooms? You probably can give me other examples.
Yes.
When should that happen? Logic would tell me maybe as soon as possible so that you can enjoy as much of it as possible. But if you pick real trendy sorts of things, and the one real trendy item that I'm seeing all over the place is the barn doors going over, the bathroom door. And that's going to date, that sort of thing is going to date a house more than anything. So if you do that kind of trendy renovation when you first move in and you expect to stay there 10 years, then you've got another major renovation to do before you leave. So talk to me a little bit about renovations, especially kitchens and bathrooms, and anything else that usually adds value that we tend to do.
I love this question. This is another one I could talk. I swear to God, I could do a 2-hour TED talk on this. So I'll provide context on the front end that, as with anything else, there's a lot of gray area in this discussion, but I'll provide a lot of context and a lot of opinion for this. On the front end of that, before I offer my opinion, obviously, if you renovate a kitchen, you'll make more money on the house when you sell it than if you had not renovated a kitchen. Same thing with bathrooms or floors, major systems. When I say major systems, I mean kind of like the core 4, roof, electric, plumbing, and the heating cooling system. Those are the core 4. When you sell a house, you want all that stuff to be done to get the absolute maximum sales price of the property. Now, maximizing sales price does not always mean maximizing what's in your pocket. Meaning if those things aren't done, it's not guaranteed that, like if you spend 10 grand on a kitchen, it's not guaranteed you're going to make 15 grand in sales price. Kitchen and bathrooms, depending on whose study you look at, tend to be the closest to 1 for 1, $1 spent to $1 returned. A lot of the other ones fall closer. You don't get the full dollar back, but what you do get is higher likelihood of sale, lower days on market, different factors that could impact. So that's in a vacuum where at the listing table, how does your home sit? Now, your question was more about what to update and when, based off of, if you're living in it for a while, do you put trendy things in? And So I'll tell you so I've done, I've loved real estate in more ways than one. Like obviously I've been selling real estate for 10 years. I own this brokerage here in St. Pete. I also do Airbnb management. I personally own multiple investment properties that I've styled and designed and updated. I've flipped from bare bones, like literally concrete and studs, to a totally renovated house. I've done that multiple times. So I have a lot of experience in this. And so I'll touch the fad thing first. So you talked about barn doors. Here's my thought on barn doors. They're a non-issue, really. Like that's one of those things where if you get into your house and you install a barn door because you like it and it's trendy now, that's great. Because when the time comes to sell, it's really not an expensive redo, right? Like to change your barn door into a standard door, not a big deal. And because it's so not a big deal, even if you didn't do it, a buyer viewing it is not going to go, oh, I love this house, but those barn doors. Like, no, you can take them off the track. The tracks come out of the wall. You install whatever doors you want. That whole project's done either a DIY in a day, or you pay a handyman $1,000, something like that. Now that's different on a kitchen, right? Let's say you did some really crazy, you did like bright orange cabinets or something like this. This is a problem when you go to resell because it was trendy for what it was. Like a good example is you see like these 1960s, 1970s bathrooms that have like the bright pink tile or bright blue tile, super dated and expensive to fix. So,
And
like,
by the way, I love those.
oh, I do too. I'm a huge fan of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
I tidied it up a little bit. Like I refreshed it, but I left one of my bathrooms in Gainesville in its original condition. And so like a 1960s, cool blue tile. I cleaned up the tub and I changed the vanity to be a little bit more modern, but I like it. It adds style. But I've seen some that I don't like also, in fairness. There's some hues of green that I think they could have done without back in the day. But so it's a balance, and it is sad sometimes because we'll go to list a house and they do a bunch of renovations. It's like, you've lived here for the last 10 years. You should have just gotten yourself a nice kitchen. You've been using a crappy kitchen for 10 years and then you put in this beautiful kitchen. You never even got to use it. So here's my general advice. If you care and if it matters to you, upgrade the property so that you can enjoy it. On the big ticket things, go safe. If you want to add character in the spots that are easy to fix. For instance, renovate the kitchen, put normal countertops, normal cabinets. If you want to go crazy with the backsplash, right? I can change backsplash in an afternoon. I can't change cabinets in an afternoon. Add your character, add your pop, your trend, but do it in the smaller parts that are easier to change down the road. But if you have the resources, you're going to be there for a while, fix your house up. Your house is your home. I'm a huge believer in the area you surround yourself in is manifests itself in other aspects of your life. But if you're going to go trendy, if you're going to go really funky, go funky on the small stuff. Otherwise, protect your investment.
It's a good idea. Good thoughts there. For example, our kitchen cabinets seem to be solid, but the door fronts have problems. Right. So things like just upgrading the door fronts,
right,
is, I think, would be a good investment. I haven't priced them yet, but
those are solid wood, right? Even the fronts.
Yes.
Yeah. You could even it's hard because there's varying tiers. Like the way I would handle your property if it were an investment property, like I might just sand it down and repaint it because those are solid wood. Solid wood never goes out of style. The paint goes out of style, but the wood never does. I don't think you could go wrong with any situation there.
One thing that I focus on, and I don't think most people do, but let's just talk about it for those who might be interested, is I'm really focused on energy efficiency and optimizing the efficiency of, so the first thing I did was had insulation added in the attic.
Yeah.
And took care of those sorts of things.
You should let people know your property has super gorgeous, very tall vaulted ceilings as well with a ton of natural light. And so energy efficiency would be very front of mind for anybody in that kind of space too. So, yeah.
And there's zero insulation in that vaulted ceiling.
Yeah.
So I'm working on that. But there are some appliances and some advances in appliances that can make things really energy efficient. So maybe I'll add some points here too along those lines. There is a heat pump dryer now that uses 30% of the energy that an regular electric dryer uses.
Wow.
Because it's pulling in air from the space to help heat the clothes. It takes longer to dry the clothes, but if you're using 30%.
Yeah, it's 1/3 of the energy cost, right?
There's also now a heat pump water heater. So you're pulling warm air down here, especially warm
especially
air
lately.
from around the water heater to help heat the water. And that uses 30% of the energy that a standard water heater does. If you've got a new water heater, a water heater jacket, the insulated jacket saves a lot of energy. So that's something. And you can even tell how much, because if you go and touch the outside of your water heater, it's not even warm to the touch usually. But if you put a jacket on it and you put your hand up underneath it, it's kind of nasty with fiberglass, but the water heater is literally hot.
Yeah.
So that saves a good bit. So focusing on energy efficiency, just in my book, is really helpful. I'm trying to reduce my living expenses so I can spend more on other things.
Right.
Now also solar is getting a lot more reasonable. For example, Tesla has a solar product. They have a solar roof that is tempered glass shingles that have solar panels integrated in with them. And they are not any more expensive than putting the solar panels up and a new roof. So if you need a new roof, it's comparable. And you can get solar panels either from Tesla or someone else that can dramatically offset your cost of energy. So talk a little bit about your experience with people's focus on that. My sense is it's not really a focal point for most people.
Yeah, interestingly enough, so obviously I'm a big real estate guy. I'm also really into like personal finance and just trying to live the good life, right? And I hear more about that stuff in my personal finance spheres than I do in the real estate spheres. I would say, I mean, I'm struggling to recollect a time where energy efficiency of appliances has even been asked of me. If any, it's the closest to that is like, hey, how old is it? With the understanding that older ones are going to be less energy efficient. But it's very rarely, hey, are these specialty? But in the personal finance spheres, people are always talking about it because, to your point, it helps you reduce your monthly spend. Also, there's a general movement towards green, which is good. And so, reduced emissions, reduced energy costs, reduced spend, that's all a very good thing. For real estate sales, it's not as big of a question as it should be, but I bet that trend changes over time, just as the sentiment does change. The closest thing I hear to people asking me about energy efficiency is with windows. All of a sudden you see old windows that are like those old, aluminum crank windows. And
Right.
Then it's a conversation about energy efficiency, which is fair because those things seep energy out through them. So, but yeah, with appliances, not as much, although arguably should be. Solar panels are great when they're there as long as they're paid for. The problem with a lot of people's solar panels is they finance them. They list their house for, let's say, $300,000, and then the buyer goes to make an offer and realizes there's a $15,000 loan attached to it with the solar panels they're expected to take on. Which, even if the property's worth $315,000, the way a lot of agents market it, and I think maybe this is bigger problem with the way agents market it than it is with the solar panels themselves. But so often it's like, hey, the house is $300,000. By the way, there's $15,000 in debt you're going to have to take on with the house, rather than just being $315,000 up front and we'll pay off the panels. And so that comes as a shock to people. But when they're paid for, it's great because they put a printout of that utility bill on the counter and it's like $20. And the buyer goes, it's like the old cartoons where the eyes pop out of the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And worse yet is leasing a solar system.
Yeah.
Because that can lock you into something where you can't pass it along to the next
Right.
buyer.
Yeah.
So leasing, I don't think on solar is
Yeah.
almost never recommended. But
Right.
for example,
and I've seen I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, finish up.
I've seen I've seen the math, and there's circumstances where I find it very compelling, even if you couldn't afford to pay cash to finance the panels, because the payment might be less than what your electric bill would be once they're installed. But if you were going to do that, again, this ties into the point I was talking about before, you need to think long term. Housing is a 10-year plan. It has to work for at least 10 years, right? And so plan it out long term. And if the time comes where you do need to sell it, be willing and able to pay that off, and don't get caught in a position where, like, you buy a house, you put solar panels on it, and then a year later you have to sell, because already, like we talked about, you don't even have equity in the home after all your expenses are paid, let alone enough to pay off the panels. So as with anything else in housing, take your time, be diligent, run your numbers, make sure it makes sense long term, and don't put yourself in a situation where you're stressed. Housing's supposed to be protective, wealth building, and comfortable, not stressful, draining, and miserable.
Yeah, let me give you, very good. Let me give you specifics on this. Now, I got a general proposal from Tesla. The engineers are going to come back and do a very specific one. Yeah. But our bill is let's say 250 average, about 1,500 kilowatts a month. And I asked them to size a solar system to take care of 100% of the energy needs after I reduce as much as I can, and charge a Tesla. So enough solar to charge an electric car. And there are 30% tax credits, and that's not a deduction, that's a credit. And it will carry over. If you don't pay enough in taxes, it'll carry over. So total system price after tax credits was right around $20,000 with a 6-year payoff.
Wow.
To break even, unless
that takes away all of your electric payments and would charge your car.
Yep.
That sounds fine to me.
Yep.
Especially if, again, as long as your plan is to be there for those 6 years, or if not, you're comfortable with knowing that that you're comfortable with marketing it the better way if you go to sell. Yeah, see, like, that situation's a no-brainer, especially the audience. Well, the audience might know you or might not know you. If you don't know Mark, that is right up Mark's alley. Mark is like on it like a bonnet when it comes to anything tech related, energy efficiency related. He is so forward thinking and forward minded. That just seems so on brand for you that, yeah. And you're also the kind of guy who would do your due diligence and run your numbers. A lot of people, unfortunately, and I am not, no industry is all good or all bad. There's great realtors, there's bad realtors. There's great solar panel salesmen, there's bad solar panel salesmen. And if you find yourself within a week of knowing about solar panels, then signing the paperwork, and you haven't run any of the numbers, you haven't looked into anything, you're probably making a mistake. But knowing you, I know you're doing your due diligence, and what you described to me sounds reasonable. What is 20K over 6 months? That'd be like a little over $3,000 a year. So what, like $300 a month?
I think it was a little less. It was close to what I pay.
Yeah, that's great. And again, the key thing there is it's also charging your car. That's this is the future.
And
I drive a truck. I spend probably $200 a month on gas minimum. And so that sounds like a good deal to me. I'm just waiting for the Cybertruck. So.
Yep. And the first one rolled off the line late last week.
I saw that. Trust me, I'm like number 60,000 in line on those registrations, and I watch all the news for it. I'm ready. When that happens, it happens. And people are like, well, why do you need a truck? Well, I'm a real estate guy, man. I've renovated 6 houses in the last 2 years, and so I need space to throw a bunch of junk in it. So the Model Y doesn't quite work for me, but the Cybertruck will.
Plus, you'll be able to power your power tools from the back of the truck,
right?
Plugging into an outlet. So,
yeah.
Let's see. There was one more thing about the solar. Oh, if you're if you're in a tax paying situation, the question is, would you rather pay taxes or would you rather add to your energy independence?
Yeah.
And spend it on your family? So
I bet a lot of people aren't really understanding the difference between like a deduction and a credit. I see that happen from time to time, especially with the electric vehicles purchase. People misunderstood a lot of that. It's like, no, a credit is worth 3 times more than a deduction,
yeah.
Something do
you want to define it a little more?
Yeah, well, one is literally just taking it off your tax bill, right? If you owe 10 grand in taxes and they're giving you a $5,000 credit, you owe 5 grand in taxes now, versus a $5,000 deduction. You do not have to pay taxes on that $5,000 of income, which, depending on your tax rate, I'm just going to assume a 33% tax rate to be, so about a third. So one is worth 5 grand, the other is worth 1/3 of 5 grand. One is literally subtracting it from your tax bill. The other is just subtracting potential income you would have to pay. And deductions are great, but I'd rather have a credit.
Right. It's a credit as an actual refund.
Yeah, it's money. It's good as cash.
And starting next year, you're going to be able, if you're buying an electric car, you're going to be able to take it off when you buy the car.
Yeah.
So you won't have to wait to get it back in your taxes.
Right.
And that's a $7,500 tax credit. For most vehicles, I think it's under $80,000.
Yeah.
And we're hoping that the high-end Cybertruck comes in right at that $80,000.
Right. And hopefully there's also a weight limit where above that amount, if you buy it in a business name, you can also like write off 100% of the depreciation in the first year.
Right.
So it makes it hard to not get a Cybertruck in the company name, really, when it boils down to it. But, yeah.
Okay, so we're coming up on the end of our time together. Is there any message you'd like to pass along? And I do want you to give your contact information, but
sure.
Any substantive points, tips, thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Yes. So I'll start with my point. I'll end with my contact information. Does that work for you?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, the key thing for anyone who's made it this far and who's listening, I just want to reaffirm that nobody knows what's going on in the future. And I know people hear this a lot, and so it's easy to dismiss it, or you'll hear people speculating, or even me speculating in these podcasts as to what may happen. The reality of the situation is nobody knows. Where we stand now, inflation's been cooling off a little bit. We got a really good report, the last inflation report that came out. I think the expectation is maybe we'll see one more rate hike, maybe 2 more rate hikes, but we seem to be approaching the end of this. This is all good news for us, but nobody knows what's going on in the future, including people like me who own real estate companies and have been doing this for a decade. We're all at the behest of the market. It's like swimming in the ocean, right? Like you can try to swim to shore, but if the riptide comes, it's going to pull you. There's nothing you can do, and you couldn't see it coming. So if you're making any real estate decisions, do what I said before, be responsible, take the time, find good counsel, find someone with the heart of an educator, not the heart of a salesperson, who's going to walk you through the process and make the right decision for you and your family. And do not make decisions based off of what you think the market is going to do in the next 6 months, because it does not matter. If you're buying a house for the next 6 months, you are not buying the right house unless you're doing like a flip, and then it's got to just scream profit to you. So that's the key thing. Be responsible, trust your professionals who are trying to guide you through the process and make long-term decisions, and you will always come out ahead. Always, always, always come out ahead in long-term. And yeah, my information is I'm Jeffrey Clarke. I'm the broker owner for Clarke Realty, office in St. Petersburg, Florida. We service everything within a serviceable distance from here, meaning if we can give you good service, we'll help you. That cutoff is somewhere about an hour. After that, it gets hard to be of any use. And you can find us by contacting the office number 727-404-0277, or going to Clarke Realty Florida, all one word, all full words, not FL, Florida, ClarkeRealtyFlorida.com, or Google Clarke Realty, and that's CLARKE. People forget my E. I had to buy the other web domain without the E, and it's like 10% of our web traffic comes from that domain, which is crazy, 1 out of 10. So, Mark, to you, I really appreciate this. I have so much fun with these. I know we just did a whole hour. No joke, I could be on here for 2 more hours. We could just
I'm sure
talk. So maybe we'll do another one in 6 months. And my prediction for the next 6 months is I think we'll continue to see a relatively flat market, maybe plus or minus 2%. And I expect that to happen for the next 12 months, barring any significant changes in interest rate policy or monetary supply.
Right. No, you're such an excellent resource. And I really appreciate how you qualify things so that you don't give these broad statements that could come back and bite you in the ass.
Right.
So I really enjoy these conversations too. And yes, let's make this a regular thing and talk about local market as well as national trends. So thanks everybody for joining us for the Thrive Co-Living Communities podcast. Always great to have Jeffrey on and really appreciate his point of view. Especially I'm glad that we got to talk about sustainability and energy efficiency, which is near and dear to my heart for sure. So thanks so much. If you like the podcast, please click the like button, subscribe, and click for notifications as well. If you want to contribute to the Thrive effort to support these podcasts and our efforts in general, go to thrivecolivingcommunities.org and become a member or supporter. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us for another great episode of the Thrive Co-Living Communities YouTube podcast. To learn more about our mission and how you can support our vision of creating co-living communities worldwide, please visit us at thrivecolivingcommunities.org. To receive advanced viewings of our podcast and other exclusive content, find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Thrive Co-Living Communities. You can also learn more ways to support our mission in the show notes below. Amazon Smile, GoFundMe, Kroger, and our own Thrive Gear store, where you can buy t-shirts, hats, and many other items. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.